A brief history lesson of America, aka North America, going back and starting around 1400. So in the 1400s, the Spanish, and I think the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese were going with the ships. They were going with these ships. They're going from Europe, basically, that way, and then they were discovering America. Some were landing in Mexico and in those islands, and then the Spanish came up and did the western side. They colonized the western side, California. And the kind of real, what we consider America, was the colonies on the eastern side. So from England and Ireland, going over by ship like that, the Mayflower, Jamestown. So established for free people that were sick of the religious persecution, the tyranny, and they said, this is open free land, we can do whatever we want. So that is actually the history of America. So all the media and everything today is to try to get people to forget about that freedom that used to be freedom, and in some ways has turned into kind of more of a farce, or more of a fake freedom where it's not really freedom. But there are some ways in which it's more freedom today than it was in the 1600s, because people have a lot of cool stuff today. Air conditioners, cars, airplanes, all those things are things that are quite more freeing than living in a hot wood shed that you build yourself with no internet, no nothing. Internet, telephones, it's all kind of freedom-based stuff. There's a lot of stuff you can do there, empowering the people compared to back in the 1600s. So the 1600s, and then in 1770s, there was the war with England, where it was colonies, English colonies, and the taxation and the control from the British was just it was what, 5%, 10%, something like that, that was actively involved with fighting the British. And they wanted to make their own country. Soccer, no. Go sit. Wanted to make their own country. So 1776 they made their own country, and the French at the same time, 1789, made a revolutionary and changed their country, kind of updating it for the people, the bourgeoisie, kind of like the landowners, basically, who were successful in the country, were kind of guiding the people toward a revolution against the British, to make their country, kind of capture the land for themselves, so they wouldn't have to pay taxes out to anyone else. Makes sense. You don't want to pay your money out to someone else. Makes sense. You want to keep the money on you and build up lots of money. You don't want to have to pay to someone else constantly. 1776. So Declaration of Independence, Constitution. So then just a few short years later, 1800, 30 years later, 1800. 12 years later, 1812, the War of 1812. It was a second revolution. Second kind of war of independence, because the British tried to come back and do business and participate again. Business and everything, we try to control again. So the 1812 war was the second war of independence. And then a couple years later we got 1820, 1830, 1840, 1850, 1860. 1860, the British were not in the picture anymore. They're just not involved as much, probably not involved as much. But then there's the North and the South. So the South wanted to make its own country because they were successful down over there. And they didn't want to pay money to anyone else. They want to keep their money on them. But the North was more successful, had better weapons, and better funding sources, stuff like that. So they were able to beat the South and use the excuse of slavery freeing the slaves of the South. So in this way, then, the North versus the South wanted to be free, and the North said, no, you have to, we're going to free the slaves. And so the North won, winning the entire southern area under the banner of the North. So that all became a part of the North, because they won the war and acquired all that territory in all the southern states, down to Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, all these southern states. So they acquired all that land, making it the North in kind of one country like that, expanding the country in that way. So there's 1860, 1870, 1880, 1890, and then 1900, 1910. Here comes World War I, 1914. World War I, and this is Germany, and this isn't at this point because it's mechanized. It's because it's mechanized now. Civil War was kind of mechanized, and so at World War I, it's mechanized now. You got ships, steamships, which drive around, where you used to have sails. So steamships, so now the steamships are driving all over the ocean. Military tanks, trucks, and even airplanes in World War I. So now it's mechanized. So because it's mechanized, now you can go great distances all of a sudden. So they could make a global scale war. They had to, even the War of 1812 was kind of a global scale war. They had the Americas and the European theater. But now, because it was mechanized, you can go a lot further. So World War I, Germany and Americas, everything, this giant kind of more of a global war. It killed a lot of people. Global war, mechanized. 1920, 1930s, again, Hitler rising because the Germany was defeated. It lost ground. Hitler wanted to reclaim that. He was very angry. So again, another mechanized war. World War II, this time even worse because the mechanization had progressed at that point. And this can show to the future if the mechanization today is even worse than it was in the World War II. So today the mechanization, it would be that much worse. A war would be that much worse. If it's large, there's probably only small wars from now on, so that's good. Because World War II was even larger. Japan, America, China, Germany, mechanized great long distance warfare. And so that was World War II. So pretty mechanized at that point. Then in America, the 50s, the boom time. And then we're talking 60s, 70s, 50s in America did a war in Korea, and 70s Vietnam. So now there's these because it's mechanized, and now with airplanes. So now it's these overseas wars really far away, at far positions, at far points away, because it's with airplanes, mechanized now. So continuing with America, and then become the kind of modern mechanized America. And in the 70s, 80s, a little bit of war in the Middle East, 90s, 2000s, 2010, 2020. So people at this point have forgotten about what the country was about, the Constitution, freedom. But there's a lot of people that remember that it keeps that going. But the mechanization has made everything mechanized at great distances. Because of these great distances, lots of things are possible that otherwise would not be possible.